Howdy everyone, today we're going to be discussing helpful mini-split tips for extreme weather conditions. Right now it is minus 10 degrees outside and this thing is still working pretty well, but there are a lot of quirks and things that I think could be very helpful for someone who has never used a mini-split before to make the experience a little bit more comfortable and convenient. First of all, the way a mini-split works is a little bit different than a traditional space heater. This is basically like an air conditioner that can be reversed. In the summertime, it works just like a regular air conditioner. It blows cold air in and hot air out. In the winter, it works the opposite way. It blows hot air in and cold air out. Heating this way is extremely efficient. It's basically just moving heat from the outside and then concentrating it into the bus. So generally, I have been able to run the heat all day and all night with no issues on the solar power that I have on board, which is about 1 kilowatt on top and 2 kilowatts of battery storage. Granted, that is with this thing set to the minimum temperature and in eco mode, so it's just barely keeping the inside warm enough for things to not freeze, but I'd say that's still pretty impressive. Right now we are connected to the grid and I have it set to 75 degrees because it is minus 10 outside and we are just trying to keep it as warm as possible inside of here. I'm basically trying to encourage it to run at 100% as much as it possibly can. One major thing that I have noticed is below 15 degrees Fahrenheit, it gets significantly less efficient. And it still puts out a very similar amount of heat. It's still very warm and it still makes the inside of the bus a lot more comfortable than being outside. But instead of camping out in the 300 to 500 watt range, it seems to camp out more in the 1000 to 1200 watt range. So it's a major step up in power consumption once you get below 15 degrees. And after that, it just becomes less efficient at heating. So right now with it being minus 10 degrees outside, we're sitting at about 45 degrees on the inside of the bus, which is not, super warm, but it's a lot warmer than minus 10, and it's keeping everything inside from freezing. So I would say that this is a good thing. We have not needed to use the propane heat yet, at least in this situation. There have been some cases where I've needed to when it's been well above minus 10 degrees. And you're probably confused because I just said that it works great at minus 10 degrees, but there are some other factors associated with this as well. So this is the outside unit, and since this is putting out colder air than the ambient air temperature, it does collect frost and ice on it. Because of this, it has a defrost cycle, so every once in a while it has to basically reverse back into an air conditioner, heat up these coils, melt all the ice off, and then you're good to go. Generally, it's a pretty seamless process and you don't really have to intervene at all, but I have noticed that if it's snowing, like it is currently, then the snow builds up in here and it gets jammed in there and it makes the ice a whole lot more intense than it normally would be. When it's not snowing or raining, typically this thing runs for about an hour or two and then it'll defrost for like 5 minutes and then it'll run for another hour or two. But in the case like this, where it's just built up super thick on the coils, it just keeps going into defrost mode. So it'll heat and then it'll defrost and it'll heat and it'll defrost and it'll only spend about 5 minutes doing each one. So in this case, what I've been doing is I'll just come out here with the heat gun and I'll just sit here and melt all the ice off, which is not the most convenient thing in the world, but it's easier and, in my opinion, a lot better than having no heat. I do have my little buddy propane heater and, I will use that if I need to, but so far just using the heat gun on this thing has been okay. Just, that is something that you're going to have to consider, is if it's snowing outside and it's below 15 degrees, this is going to be a major problem, and you'll either have to melt it off or use an alternative source of heat if you don't have a way to melt it off. I've had a couple friends recommend making a kettle of water and just pouring it over the grate and the coils, and that might be an okay idea, but I'm not super comfortable with doing that on my own unit. I will let someone else test that out because typically when you do that, ice expands and cracks and explodes really rapidly, and I don't want to damage the coils or the pump or anything inside. Using the heat gun brings it up to temperature a lot slower and prevents that from happening. Another issue that I've been having on these days where it's below zero, not so much when it's around zero, but closer to minus 10 degrees, this happens a lot. The defrost cycle will melt all the water down to the bottom, and it collects down here and just forms basically a giant ice block. And that seems to interfere with the performance of the mini-split a lot. Specifically, if we're looking in the front of it here, I'm not sure if you can really see. I guess you can't really see it, but on the back there is a giant ice block that is formed from all the defrost coming down and then refreezing. And a couple times in the middle of the night, I've heard the fan scraping on the ice. And I didn't do anything about it because I was like, well, you know, I can just replace the fan blade if I need to. But looking at the fan blade, it doesn't seem to have been damaged by that at all, so it must be a very durable blade, and it took care of itself. I didn't have to come out here with the heat gun and melt that down. It just went away on its own, so I guess that problem resolved itself. That is something to note though, that the ice does build up quite a bit in here to the point that it will start dragging on the blade, and I have to imagine that that will definitely increase wear on this thing by a lot. Trying to defrost it inside the unit is a little bit harder too, because you have to take this whole grate off. If you try to just do it from here, it's so cold outside that really almost no heat actually gets to the ice. I do think it's pretty awesome though. In years past, I've needed to have a 50 amp connection to run a reasonable amount of electric heat if I wanted electric heat. And we are running all of our heat just off of a little extension cord here. And it's a cheap, flimsy one too. I've only ever seen the Minisplit pull up to 10 amps, and this extension cord is rated for up to 15 amps, supposedly. I start to notice voltage drop at around 12 amps, but yeah, there's really almost no voltage drop running the Minisplit just on a cheap extension cord like this. The only reason I mention the extension cord is because this is very important for anyone who wants to run very long lengths of extension cord, and I have about 500 feet worth of extension cord to basically get myself power from anywhere that I need to. So having a Minisplit and reducing your load in that capacity is reducing the cost for extension cords by a pretty significant amount. I have 500 feet worth of extension cord that I only got for about 150 bucks, but if it was 50 amp rated, it would be a lot closer to $1,000 or maybe even over $1,000. Overall, I'd say that this Minisplit is a baller, and I'm extremely impressed with its performance. We have never used a Minisplit in this low of temperature before, and I was fully prepared to have to just use all my propane if I need to, but it's been cranking along just fine. It's been heating just fine, and no complaints from me. This is a very cheap unit as well. If you want to check out my review on it, I will leave a link down below. But if you have a more expensive unit, then it should work all that much better. Thank you all for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.